situation in many parts of the world, many parts of Europe. Europe maybe faced a big impact. When we start fighting climate change, we also have other things happening. The climate change is creating all these extreme weather events that are creating very high prices. Sometimes there are cases in the US where the prices have been very high for an extended period of time. Then when we rely more on solar and wind energy, we have these long periods of when it's not sunny or not windy, when the prices can go up for a long time. And then climate policy is when we start putting a price on carbon emissions and fossil fuels. That's going to increase the price of energy that we're facing today. And then the big question is, what are the distributional effects of these big policies that we have today? These energy prices, energy markets. How is the cost burden distributed across the society? Who's basically paying the final energy bill? And how do the households respond when the prices go up? What happens, and how do they find ways to cope with these high energy prices? And these are the questions that have motivated me. We can take a simple thought example. What if all of a sudden the price of energy, or it could be some other necessity, rose and you had to pay 500 euros per month more that you didn't know about beforehand? That was pretty much what happened to a lot of the households during the energy crisis in 2022, during the fall. This is quite normal electricity price increase. I'm sure some of you had experienced this and you have first-hand knowledge of how you responded. But what are the principal channels? What you could do? Well, first, and maybe the most obvious response channel, is to reduce electricity use. When the electricity price goes up, you can just use less of that. If you have the margins, that's great. You might have a big house and you can seal off parts of the house or lower the temperature or find other ways. Maybe you have some unnecessary consumption that you can reduce. You can in principle try to earn a little bit more, and that's something it's easier in some other jobs. For us university professors, we don't get paid more even if we work double or more than that. We've all tried that many times and we don't get paid more, but there are many other jobs where you can take extra shifts or work more hours or work during weekends and so forth. You can get money from the government. During the crisis, actually Finland had these programs. Actually all countries in Europe more or less had different kinds of programs, so the government was paying part of this increased bill for people. If everything else fails, you can always not pay your bill. It's called in English payment default or maksuhäiriö in Finnish. This is a bit drastic channel because it's not really, you don't make the problem go away, you just postpone the problem into the future. You will have even more problems when you lose your positive credit ranking in the system. But that's what in principle people can do and did do during the crisis quite a bit. And the last bit is basically everything else. You can reduce other consumption, you can switch to a cheaper consumption basket, you can take the money from your bank account, meaning that you reduce your future consumption, or you can borrow it from a friend. These are pretty much the channels that by definition are everything that could happen. The residual term is that incorporates everything else. The big question is that how do these households really respond, and do they vary between, let's say, households' income or where they live or what type of households they are, big or small, what kind of house they live in and so forth. Who are the ones who are taking the biggest negative hit from the energy prices compared to some other households? So how can we study this household level responses to these high prices? Well, just by looking at the data, we see that people who get high energy bills or electricity bills are the ones who don't have a lot of problems in life because of correlation with income. These tend to be the wealthy households, bigger households, who have bigger houses and so forth. So just by looking at the correlation is not really helping us there. We know that correlation is not the same as causality. So we are really interested in getting into the causal response of these households. We can't randomly give people different bills. Somebody would get a high bill and somebody would get a low bill. At least I can't. I don't have the power to do that, and nobody in Finland pretty much has that. But there is something else we can do, and that is to try to find some natural experiments where nature is doing some kind of randomization and then make use of that as researchers and learn something from that. And that's one example how this could be done. During the energy crisis, we had prices that really increased a lot. It went up by a factor of 8 during the crisis between September, that was the peak month, and compared to the previous years. This came as a surprise. It was triggered by the Russian attack to Ukraine, and nobody before that was anticipating these very high energy prices for the fall of 2022. It came as a surprise. What is the natural experiment we can take use of here is this sort of a natural randomization that divided Finns into those that really faced this crisis and some Finns that were shielded from this crisis. And that is caused by the fact that some Finns had these long-term fixed price contracts during the crisis. This blue line here would be a household that made their fixed term contract here before the crisis was known to happen, before the war in Ukraine and all that. And they were lucky because they faced these low prices throughout the whole crisis period. You would know who these people are because they would come and talk to you and tell what kind of deal they got with their retailer, and they would go to sauna 4 times a week. They're pretty much the lucky ones here in this sort of a lottery created by nature. Then you had some other groups, like the treatment group included in here, that were unlucky. They made their contract here. Their contract ran out right in the middle of the crisis, and they had a massive price spike during the crisis, basically overnight. And that would be the treatment group. So we can learn something about the causal effect by comparing the development for both of these type of households, and then over time when they faced low versus high prices. And that's what we take advantage of here. This is an example. When I say we, I talk about our research group, but this is a more common Nordic approach. Nordic in the sense that in the Nordic countries we have a good data infrastructure existing here in Finland based on Statistics Finland, where we have access to pseudonymized data at the household level. And then we can combine different data sets and then form these household level data sets that we do then that spans the crisis period in Finland. So we have electricity use data from something called Fingrid Data Hub, that is from the meters. Then we know people's earnings and benefits from the tax authority. We have a payment default from the legal register center. How it works is that if somebody like me, if I don't pay my bill, I get a payment reminder, and that has happened many, many times. So there is nothing surprising, at least in our family, that this happens, because I forget things. But that's really not the default yet. After that, I get a second reminder, and only after that, after a lag of like 1 to 2 months, there is the mark in the register, and that's what we use here with my group. Then we can impute the other consumption from the income and electricity bill, and have the background data from Statistics Finland. So I'm going to show some results for Finland, but in principle this is an approach that many countries in the Nordics have could also do, and many groups are working on similar topics, everyone with their own advantages and disadvantages. So this is showing the electricity use results as first. What I'm showing you here is the comparison between the control and the treatment groups. So 0 here means that the control and treatment development are the same. And the line here, the vertical line, is the point when the contract ends for the treatment groups. They suddenly face a higher price, and that's when we see that their consumption goes down compared to the control group. It's good to remember that we are moving towards the winter here. If we look at the pure data, it's going up for both control and treatment group. And at the same time, we had these big campaigns, energy-saving campaigns by Motiva in Finland that were encouraging people to use less electricity, again affecting both the treatment and control group. So what I'm showing here is only, we can isolate the pure effect of these higher prices. And we see that households are able to consume less electricity, something like close to 10%, depending a bit on the contract month. So this is for a different month, September, contract ending in October, and so forth. One thing that comes out from here is that households who know that their contract is ending later, this would be the patch whose contract ends in January, they start to reduce their consumption already before that. It's not that they just wake up one day, then they realize that their prices have gone up, and then they start reacting, but they are smart people. They start to invest in heat pumps or some wood stoves before that, and we see it as a lower electricity consumption already before the price actually goes up. Then looking at different households, here I split everybody by their income and by their whether they use a lot or a little compared to the median in each income group. One thing that stands out here is that the high income people are the ones who find it easier to reduce their consumption. Maybe in the highest income quintile they have a jacuzzi which they turn off, or for the winter or something else. They have big houses that they can partly seal off, or maybe they already heated their temperatures too much and they find it easier to reduce it from 24 to 22 degrees, compared to the lowest income quintile all the way to the left, where we have households who basically just have a fridge and a TV, maybe not even electric heating, and they find it much more difficult to reduce their consumption. So this response channel is there mainly, and it's bigger for the higher income households. Then we look at the earnings channel. We weren't expecting to find much here because we know that there are many reasons why people work, and having to pay your bills is not on the top of that list. But we still find effects statistically when we take all these months together, and we see that this effect is not driven by the highest income quintiles, because these are people who have a lot of money, maybe they're not struggling so much to begin with, but it's mainly driven by the lower income individuals. The problem for the first quintile is that we have a lot of people who are unemployed or pensioners here, and they don't really have this margin. They can't really go and work more as easily as people who are already in the working life. And that's why the strongest effect here is in the second and the third income quintile. Then we'll look at the negative effects. What happens to the payment defaults? Remember, this is people who don't pay their bills. We see that the defaults start to go up with a bit of a delay after the crisis hits for households that face this higher price. It's on average 0.4 percentage point. What it means is if you have a Finnish village of 10,000 people, this would be Karkkila or Ylöjärvi, we would have 40 payment defaults in that village because of the energy crisis, because of these higher energy prices. So not a massive effect, but of course for these 40 people, it can be quite drastic. These 40 families, they might have some bad consequences later on. We see that if households know that this is happening, they have an anticipation period before the prices go up, the effect is a bit lower. Partly also because the price shock is lower for these households, meaning that if there is, we know that this crisis is going to come, then households find ways to organize their lives a bit differently. They make the investments, and then the shock is not as big as it would be. But this means that it's important in climate policies as well to have these transition periods and give people time instead of surprising everybody by these, let's say, big price increases caused by climate policy. The default effect is driven by the lowest income households, but also, and this was to our surprise, by the middle income household. This is mainly driven by the households who have high debt compared to their annual income, who maybe have mortgage, and even if they have high income on paper, they have committed to use that income to pay off their mortgage, and actually they don't have so much money left after doing that. And these are the type of households who have this increased payment default response as well. Not the highest income quintile, because they turn out to be fine apart from everything else. Then we have the other consumption, which is going down after all these other channels are taken into account, depending a little bit on the month. And we see a drastic result here is that the lowest income quintile, especially the high users, are the ones who need to cut back their other spending the most. The other spending that was already the lowest by definition, because these are the people who don't earn so much, they need to cut back that already low spending the most. And that's one of the main results why energy prices have this adverse inequality effect because of exactly what I'm showing here. We can also split this by different ways, not just by income, but looking at other characteristics. One thing, maybe a few things that stand out from here is the indebted households are the ones that see a biggest increase in their defaults, as we would expect. So people having too much debt can actually be bad when there are other shocks in life. These cumulative shocks are what are causing problems to people. And then people in rural area are seeing the biggest reduction in their other residual consumption. So it's a bit of an urban-rural divide as well when we talk about these energy price increases. One more thing I want to show to you. Now I'm getting back to the 500 euro bill that I had in the beginning. I was asking how would you respond, and now we can go back to the data and see how did the Finns respond to the energy price increase. This is just the pure data, calculated in the way that if there was a 10-cent per kilowatt hour increase in electricity prices, this would be basically like doubling the climate policy we have in Europe, roughly at the moment. How much all the different income groups are paying of that. This is basically asking who is paying the bill without taking any behavioral responses into account. We see that the lowest income people, again on the left, are the ones who face the highest initial shock, only because this is a necessity and they are using most of their income to electricity. That is creating that effect alone. So remember, the 500 euros that I have in here, I have just divided the actual bill by how much people earn in a given month, and that gives me the y-axis here. So people, that would increase people's bill by something like 5% in the lowest income quintiles and a bit less than 1% in the highest income quintiles. This is something that the literature is routinely doing, not taking into account any behavioral responses. Something we can do in Finland is to also use what I showed you before and quantify what are the actual response channels to this increase. And that's what I'm going to show you next. The light gray bar is the reduction in consumption. Of course, people don't have to pay this full bill if they find ways to reduce their consumption in here. But that margin is less there for the lowest income quintile. It's much bigger for the highest income quintile, because here it is 1/3 of their full effect, the full bill that they can take into account by this channel, whereas for these lowest income quintiles it is close to less than 1/5. Then we see the labor earnings channel. People can always work more, but that seems to be there mainly for the middle income people. Pension channel is not something, pensions don't really respond here, only this voluntary supplementary pension sometimes that we have in Finland. And what happens, we have the defaults that are really increasing here for the lowest income quintiles, and these lowest income people need to cut back their other consumption the most. So just to conclude, we're getting two adverse effects for the lowest income people. Not only they face the biggest initial shock from these high prices because they are spending the most in energy, but also because they don't have the adjustment channels. They don't find it easy to reduce their consumption or earn more. They are stuck with their current bill pretty much, and that's why we are seeing many worse negative consequences for these lowest income groups than for the higher income groups. So that's the main finding from the bigger agenda that me and my group have. Well, there are solution proposals. We could make compensation policies like the one we had during the crisis, but also be prepared to have these compensation policies in place when we have stricter climate policies in the future, and we should make them depend on people's income. This is not a culture we have in Finland. We pay the same subsidies to everybody, but many countries in Europe and in the US are already doing that, where they condition support to people or households based on their income, for instance. So that's something we should at least consider in Finland, and what I showed you before is the reason to consider that. And the second thing I wish we did a bit more routinely in Finland, whenever we do like climate and energy plans or any kind of policy design, we could pay a little bit more attention into this inequality aspect, because now it's not done routinely. But we have the data to do that as researchers, so meaning that the ministries could also have the data either directly or in cooperation with us professors or academics, and that could, make it easier for Finland to tackle these problems of economic inequality and climate change, both at once. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the research group, the broader group in environmental economics at the University of Helsinki, and then the group of PhD students and postdocs that I'm working with. Thank you.
This was the last one. I highly suggest you guys have a conversation here at 5. So in 40 minutes we have the final lecture in the Great Hall. So please enjoy your time. Eli 40 minuutin päästä alkaa juhlasalissa sitten viimeinen juhlaluento, mutta tähän asti vapaa.
Joo, kiva. Niin, joo.
Jossain määrin.
No niin, teilläkin läpi.
Joo, onko se jäämässä vai? Osaatko käydä sen?
Tiedätkö sen, että miten paljon
En ole läsnä paikan päällä, mutta se kaikki yliopistojen on hienoa.
siinähän voisi ennustaa.
Se tukeekin. Se on ihan kerrassaan hieno. Kiitos samoin.
8-kertainen hinnannousu esimerkiksi.
Sen mä oon muistanut. Moi! Ei totta! Ei vitsi, mahtavaa! Kiitos paljon! Joo. Ei mä en odottanut tätä ollenkaan. Oli iloinen yllätys. Mä pystyn pitää piilossa. Joo. Hyvä. Joo. Kiitti paljon. Joo. Joo, niinpä. Oikein mielestäni oli juttu, kun mä en löytänyt sitä ekaa huonetta, mihin mentiin. Koska me ollaan paneelin kanssa koulutettu kaikissa muissa varmaan. Vanhalla puolella olisi vielä yksi huone, missä on koskaan käynyt. Joo. Joo, kiitos paljon. Tämähän oli yllätys. Jostain saanut. Niillä on tietysti noin mediahälytykset. En tiedä, mistä ne on huomannut. En mä kauheasti huomannut mainostaa, joo. Nytkin on lapset kotona, nytkin vanhemmat on vähän kaukana. Peräkkään päästä tänne.
Niin on. Joo, parempi vähän.
Just se voi jakaa. Joo, niin että se on ihan teema. Olen varma, miten tää toimii. Moikka. Kiva nähdä. Moi hei, kiva nähdä livenä.